you should be a good person. But in reality, you're not going to go to hell if you're a bad person.
Are you ready? It's that time!
Whenever we get that new theme song, we need to break this one out on occasion just to remind people of suffering.
I was actually thinking this might be our last episode with the old theme song. Because
and all of the people
guy
listening to
swore
this
to me
are
that this was
celebrating.
going to be the week that he was going to drill down and record the new one. So we'll see if that came to fruition. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is season 6 of Man Buns and Jesus, where we're talking a little bit deeper about theology and about right theology. I am one of your hosts, Josh Laborious. I'm a pastor out in Eastville, California, and my co-host over there is Benjamin Olschlager. He's a pastor in Lake Orion, Michigan. What a hero to the people, a true scholar of our time, and an esteemed reverend figure, or something.
The more glowing the introduction from Josh, you should just know that he respects those people less.
I was actually just thinking, one of these days I'm going to write a page of just accolades, made up accolades that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to read it off like I'm introducing you to a royal court or something.
No, you should just save that for the next time we have Father Ted on.
Oh, but I wouldn't have to make up his I could just use real ones. And
I mean, fair, but the made up ones would be even better.
That's true. That's true.
So Josh, we're talking about good works today. And we just lost half our audience. Because this is the subject that makes all Lutherans everywhere uncomfortable. And it probably shouldn't. Because
yes,
like the way that we should approach good works really shouldn't intimidate us.
On some level, I think you're right. I do think, I was actually thinking about this with the introduction. This whole idea, just because you're a bad person doesn't mean you go to hell. And for a lot of people, that's like a weird concept. And I understand some of the hesitation because I think Christianity, and this is a rabbit hole we could dive into, and I don't think we need to. But I think some of the trouble Christianity is in as far as public opinion is because there has been so much focus on good works. Because so many people, and this includes Christians, right, say, well, Christianity is just a moral system. Or, why do you go to church? Well, I go to church so I can learn how to be a good person. Or I take my kids to church because I want them to have that ethical, moral grounding. And it's like, no, you're missing the point in a pretty big way. We talked about this, I think it was 2 weeks ago when we talked about justification, or maybe it was 3 weeks ago. Like, that is the point of Christianity, is that you are a bad person. You are a sinner. You do deserve to go to hell. That's true for me. That's true for Ben. That's true for anyone who will ever listen to this podcast. But, and this is what Christianity is about, you are a sinner, but because of what Jesus did, you don't have to suffer the punishment for that. But because there in some circles there is so much focus on good works and doing the right thing, and some people even drag that into the salvation conversation, I think there is a problem with people just viewing Christianity as a rule book. It's like, no, that's not the point. But that is the point of this podcast. So we're gonna, and I think part of the core of this confusion, well, actually, I don't want to start there. We're gonna start where I said we were gonna start.
Before you get into that, I want to add the additional note. It's not just that Christianity uses its theology, uses its ethic as a rule book that, you know, causes it a lot of public opinion problems, we'll say. But it's also the opposite. It's also when we focus so much on this, just like, do you follow the banner that is Christianity? And we don't ever focus on the life change, the heart change that is following Christ by picking up your cross.
Yes.
That also leads to some of the bad reputation pieces. So it's both.
Yeah,
it's people who focus on it too much and people who don't focus on it enough. And as Josh and I's professors at the seminary would say all the time, you have to sit uncomfortably on the fence.
Which I think segues perfectly into what is maybe the most important thing to get right about good works. And I'm actually going to see if I have the line. I do. So I'm going to. Good works are not necessary for salvation, but they are necessary. And for any of you out there who are like dyed-in-the-wool Lutherans and you're like, whoa, hold on, because I'm going to read to you from the Book of Concord, from our confessions. This is the epitome of the Formula of Concord, Article 4, line, this is Affirmative Theses 4. In this sense, well, no, I'm going to start at Thesis 3 because it's a complete thought. We also believe, teach, and confess that all people, particularly those who have been reborn and renewed through the Holy Spirit, are obligated to do good works. In this sense, the words, and this is Thesis 4, in this sense, the words necessary, should, and must are used correctly in Christian fashion, also in regard to the reborn. In no way is such use contrary to the pattern of sound words and speech. Good works are not necessary for salvation. Don't hear us wrong. We're not saying you earn heaven. You can't. It would be nice if you could, but you can't. That is beyond us. We are saved.
I don't even know that it would be nice if you could.
But you should do good works. Good works are required of us. Like, this is part of what it means to be a Christian. It doesn't mean you're perfect, but it does mean you're trying.
Yeah.
And this is part of our confession. This is how Scripture talks. I mean, if you look, especially at the epistles, most of the focus is, okay, Christ has saved you.
Now
and
what?
Here's kind of how we respond. Here's how we act because we are changed by that reality. And
one of my favorite passages of all time, and it's so unfortunate the circumstances that it's kind of couched in, because it makes it way less easily referenceable or quotable. And I'm blanking on the exact passage off the top of my head, but I want to say it's like Galatians 3. It's another one of Paul's conversations around circumcision, where there's big argument about, okay, we recognize who Jesus is, what he's done, but what do we do about things like circumcision? Like, what do we do about the specific markers and actions that we've been commanded to make throughout our history? And Paul's response is basically, you don't need them. Faith is the important thing when it comes to like whether you're saved, but you still need love. And the quote, as I've as I memorized it was either circumcision or uncircumcision matters. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. Which is like what Luther said in less words, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I think a perfect example of this concept from Jesus' ministry is when the Pharisees and kind of these people who are waiting to catch him up, they bring a woman who's been caught in adultery. And they say the law of Moses says that we should stone her. We should put her to death for this sin. And his response, of course, is let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And that's that's this idea of you're not perfect either, calm down. But then his word, and this is where it kind of starts to apply to our conversation today. And his words to her, because he is perfect, right? He is one who is without sin. So he is perfectly within his rights to cast stones. And he doesn't. He says, neither do I condemn you. That's not the end of the conversation, though. He then says, go and sin no more. So he says, you are forgiven. Don't do it again. And this is a sermon illustration that I'm going to pull out at some point. Actually, I might not. We'll see. We'll see if I actually have stones to use it. It is this idea. Imagine yourself in a sanctuary or in a building, like wherever the sermon is taking place, and you kill the lights. It's totally dark, and especially because it was bright and now it's dark, no one can see anything. And I say, I want you, as you are comfortable, to either give me a thumbs down, an ugly face, or flip me off as the preacher. Which is something you shouldn't do. Right? We'll say this is sin. Especially if you go all the way and you're flipping me off, that's not cool. Especially in that setting. And then I turn the lights back on. How many people are going to keep their middle fingers up or their thumbs down or their face is ugly? Most will not. They'll say, oh, lights are back on, time to not do those things. And then the follow-up question is, do you guys want me to turn the lights back off so you can go back to doing what you wanted? And hopefully the answer is no. It's like we were in the darkness of sin and death, and when we are redeemed by Christ, the light, we're brought into the light and we're shown what is good and right. Why would we want to go back to the darkness? And that's an analogy. There's a gentleman named Brian Barlow who does a lot of ministry out here in the Southwest. He used to be part of kind of the LGBTQ community and living that lifestyle. And he got connected with church. He repented. He changed his life around. He's now married to, I think she was the church secretary, and they have, I think, 3 or 4 kids. And that's his analogy when he talks about homosexuality. He's like, why would I leave someone in the dark? And once you're out of the dark, why would you go back to it? Because people ask, like, are you tempted to go back to that lifestyle now that he's kind of reformed? And he says, no. Why would I be tempted to go back to the dark? So this is all kind of building in, and I have a question, because here's where I think sometimes our mental obstacle is when we say, well, you don't need good works for salvation, but they are necessary. And I'm curious for your opinion on this, Ben. Do humans need reward and punishment to be good?
I think the answer is yes. In part because that seems to be God's structure for humanity from the beginning, right? Go back to the garden. Adam and Eve placed there. They have one rule. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, you shall surely die. But on the flip side, if you do as you're commanded, you get to live a wonderful life in the garden. So there was I like the language of carrot and stick.
Yes.
There was a carrot and there was a stick. Don't eat the fruit or you'll die. Or do eat the fruit, you will die. Don't eat the fruit. You get to live in this beautiful garden.
And to be clear, we're not saying the fruit was a carrot, because carrots aren't fruit.
Correct. They're a vegetable. It's part of a root system.
Well, and
Anyway.
it's even as you see kind of God develop the laws of Israel in Leviticus 26, he spends an entire chapter talking about the rewards that the Israelites will reap if they are obedient to God's laws. And then he spends the other half of the chapter talking about, but if you don't, here are the punishments that are going to result from that.
Yeah. I mean, even the 10 Commandments, right? There's a couple of commandments that come with kind of blessing attached to them. But like specifically the 4th commandment, honor your father and mother. And if you do,
life is going to go well for you.
It will go well with you and you will live long on the earth. Like, there is a clear reward to doing the right thing. And the fact that God structured that into the way that we live, the world in which we live, I don't think should be that surprising to us. And if we look at a lot of I don't want to make this partisan necessarily, but if you look at a lot of the policy that gets enacted in politics, on one side of the aisle you have all carrot, no stick. On the other side of the aisle you've got all stick and very little carrot, if not no carrot. So
yes,
nobody wants to either be generous or actually enact justice. And
here's a fundamental truth. Aside from the question of do we need it, it's if you want behavior to be repeated, you reward it. If you want behavior to stop, you punish it.
Josh and I both have dogs. That's how that works.
That's how dogs work. That's how children operate. You'd be surprised how much child psychology is when kids are doing things that are good, whether that is, they're behaving, or even if they're exploring, if they're problem solving, if they're going through these mental steps that you want kids to kind of develop as they grow up, if you reward that. And then the flip side is if kids are doing things they shouldn't do, you have to punish them because they have to learn, oh, this is bad. And the punishment makes the brain associate, oh, I'm associating that with a bad thing that I don't want to happen again. This is, and I think here's where some of the issue is. And I had a friend while we were at seminary, one of our professors said something along the lines of the gospel is enough on its own. And he was ranting a little bit about the church growth movement. And I was curious. So I had a non-believer friend who was in St. Louis, and I asked, who had never really had any interaction with the gospel. I said, hey, can you just read the book of Mark for me? And I sent her a link to a Bible app. I was like, it's free. Just, can you read it? And I just want to see what your reaction is. And when we sat down and we talked about, she read it and we sat and we talked about, what her reaction was. And her reaction was, you don't have to do anything. And that really bothered her. Because we are so wired for, well, I do good things because, I'm looking for that reward. Whether that is a tangible reward or even, and this is how people even talk about it. They say, well, I do good things for other people for the good feeling I get. It's you're still looking for a reward. It's just maybe a more intrinsic one.
There's a whole Seinfeld episode about that. They spend the entire episode trying to do something truly good with no benefit to themselves. And at the end of the episode, I believe it's like Kramer like randomly calls into some charity that he saw on TV and gives like $20. And I think Jerry turns to him and goes, "Well, did you feel good about it?" "Yeah." "You failed." Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But then on the other side, there is no ultimate punishment for being a bad person. And this for her was a really difficult thing because, when you're looking at it from from the eternal picture, there was no carrot and stick. And I think there's a little bit of, okay, that's fair. However, and hopefully this segues us a little bit, Ben's right when he says God has kind of designed the world to work this way, because the reality is there are natural consequences here and now for good and bad behavior. Right? When you do something nice for your neighbor, they tend to treat you more kindly or more patiently, or maybe down the line they do something nice for you. Right? If you dump garbage on your neighbor's lawn, they're going to treat you less kindly. There's kind of relational consequences for what we do.
Yeah. We don't necessarily believe in karma, but karma is kind of an observable truth within the world that we live in that God has created for us. Like,
to clarify what I think Ben is saying, he means karma in the colloquial sense.
Yes. Yeah, not in the Eastern spirituality sense. Like,
yeah, in the what goes around comes around kind of sense.
Yes, exactly.
And there's a lot of truth to that. And even when you look at God's laws, when you follow them, things tend to go better for you. And when you ignore them, things tend to go poorly. And I always thought it was, and I was telling Ben about this before the show, one of our professors at some point described it like this. God has designed the world, God has designed us as people to operate a certain way. And when we operate according to that design, things tend to function more smoothly. But when we try to go our own way and say, well, I'm going to, do things contrary to how we've been built, things tend to get a little screwy. And I got two examples for you. One of them is you can use a screwdriver as a hammer. It can be done. Whether it's you flip it around and you use the hammer or the handle of the screwdriver to try and tap a nail in, or you could just stab the nail until it goes into whatever board you're trying to drive it in. It can be done. However, in the process of doing that, because you are not operating the nail or the screwdriver as intended, you are going to probably dent up your board. You're probably going to hit your hand at least once. You're going to bend the nail. Like, all sorts of things are going to go wrong. And if you had just used a hammer, or if you had just used a screw instead of a nail, and used things as they were designed to be used, your project would have gone much more smoothly. And another kind of image analogy is a train. Trains are designed to go on tracks. You can remove a train from a track and say, well, this train wants to go another way. And you know what? If conditions are right, you might even get a few feet before that train is going to have some problems because there's no rail to guide it. It's like God put us on the rail. He said, this is the design. He said, this is how I'm intending for you to operate. And we can flaunt that. But it's not going to go the way we want it to. And that's always been very helpful for me, because that is this idea of we've been built to operate a certain way. It's not, because it's not arguing, it's not arguing based on specific examples. Because I don't find that super helpful. It's like, and I don't even know if they do this anymore, and you might not have experienced this, but I know when I was in 8th grade going into 9th grade, every 8th grader in my county, we all had to go to Georgia National Fairgrounds and watch like a 4-hour presentation on the dangers of sex. And they had really gross pictures of, the results of different STDs, and it was this whole thing of like abstinence because this is what's going to happen if you don't. And some of that was true. Some of it was a little bit of where we're going to use fear as a tool. But the reality is, if you're going to say, well, bad things are going to happen, like this specific bad thing is going to happen if you don't do this. If that specific bad thing doesn't happen, first of all, people are like, okay, you were full of crap. And then they're going to doubt everything else that you tell them. Whereas if we use this language of, well, God hasn't designed us that way, and yeah, you might be able to get a little bit, but like ultimately it's not going to be for your benefit. I think we are being more faithful to how the Bible talks about our actions and good works. And another example to close that off, and again, I don't know if they do this anymore, but once upon a time, people would say, well, if you smoke marijuana once, you're going to get addicted and it's going to be this whole thing. And then you have the one kid who smokes weed once, finds out, oh, I'm not instantly addicted. And then they go and start trying other things. Here's the problem. Okay, marijuana is not, chemically speaking, is not instantly addictive. It is addictive over time, but trying it once, you're not necessarily going to get hooked. There are drugs out there that, chemically speaking, you use them once, they alter your brain to a state of dependence. Amphetamines are one of them, or are a class of drugs that does that. They change your neurochemistry first use. Okay? So be honest with people. You say, say you're talking about weed. This is addictive, and not necessarily in the first try, but it can build into something you don't want it to be, because that then gives you more credence when you say, oh, but this other class of drugs over here, don't even try once, because they have. So kind of generally speaking, with good works, we have to be honest with how we talk about it and not just try and build up straw men, because eventually someone's going to test your straw man. And if they find out it falls over right away, they're not going to trust any of the other things you taught them about what it means to be good, what it means to live according to God's will. I might have jumped a little bit down a rabbit hole there, but
You did, but that's okay. I actually want to circle back.
We want. It is our podcast.
Yeah. I actually want to circle back to your friend in St. Louis for a sec. So I think something that, especially within Lutheran theology, we really struggle to wrap our minds around is, can someone be enough of a jerk? Episode 1.
Great episode. We even remastered it.
Can somebody be enough of a jerk that they lose their salvation?
No.
I think yes. So
you're going to have to explain that one.
Yeah. Here's where I'm coming. Not in the sense of like,
you cannot out-sin Jesus' grace.
They are never irredeemable. But can they, despite being, a baptized child of God, be enough of a jerk? Or just be a horrible enough person that they are no longer following Christ?
See,
and that's where like, I think the answer can be yes. So, Solid Declaration, Article 4, faith is a divine work in which changes us and makes us born anew of God. It kills the old Adam, makes us altogether different people in heart and spirit, mind and all powers, and it brings with it the Holy Spirit. Oh, it is a living, busy, active, mighty thing, this faith. It is impossible for it not to be doing good works incessantly.
Correct.
It does not ask whether good works are to be done, but before the question is asked, it has already done them and is constantly doing them. Whoever does not do such works, however, is an unbeliever.
Here's the thing. If you have been kind of like just listening to us in the background, listen up good for this one. Okay. I think the order is really, really important here. It is not that you have been so much of a jerk or you have been such a bad person that you have lost your salvation. I contend somewhere along the line you lost your faith or you didn't really have faith, and that lost your salvation, and that also results in you being more and more of a bad person. Because what the solid declaration is talking about, and what James talks about over and over again, is that faith without works is dead, right? If you have this genuine true faith that God loves you, that he wants what's best for you, that he has done all of this for you on the cross with Jesus, that is going to impact your actions, right? If someone walks up to you on the street and hands you a check for $1 million, you don't kick them in the nuts, right? That's not how you respond. No one would respond like that. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure someone would. Anyway, in the same way, if we say, I do believe in Christ, I do believe that he has done all this for me, that he has forgiven me of my sins, the natural response is, I want to respond how he wants me to respond. But I think the order is really important. It's not that you were such a bad person that you lost your salvation. It's that they both have the same cause, right? You lost your salvation because you're falling away from the faith, and you stopped striving to be good because you're falling away from the faith.
Yes, I think it's kind of a both and though. Like, I think oftentimes when someone is falling into,
can we say it can be cyclical?
Sure, for sure.
Because what I mean, and to clarify what I mean by that for people who aren't tracking with me, say you're starting to be like, I don't know about this faith thing. And that gives you some freedom, so you start doing things you shouldn't because you're not really as convicted anymore. And then you're like, oh, I really like doing these things I shouldn't do. I'm going to leave more of that faith behind because it's inconvenient. It keeps telling me that I shouldn't do these things. And it spirals. And I can contend that. But I want to be I don't want to leave anyone any doubt that, oh, am I not good enough to go into heaven? No, that's stupid. Yes, you're not good enough, but that doesn't matter. You're not saved because you're a good or a bad person. But yes, without a doubt, and Revelation talks about this, James talks about this, Paul talks about this, sitting in sin can ultimately pose danger to your faith.
Yes.
That's fair.
Yes.
And saying I'm getting more and more comfortable with sin, yes, that can without a doubt pose danger to your faith, which in turn is a danger to your salvation.
And perhaps I'm splitting hairs here, but the thought process that I was tracking down is that at some point, whatever sin you're living in becomes enough of an idolatry that it usurps your faith.
Yes, I am comfortable with that. Well, maybe comfortable is the wrong word, but no, I think that's a hair worth splitting.
Yes. So
saying this, whether it's I enjoy or I'm addicted to, or I'm so connected with this sin, I want to leave behind the thing that is telling me it's wrong. Yes.
Yeah. To your friend in St. Louis who's wrestling with this, where's the stick? I think we can reasonably say something like, well, if you look at someone's life and it is just utter filth, and it shows a pattern of utter filth, there's reason for us to doubt faith.
Yeah. which
And it's like,
isn't our place to declare, right? I'm not going to go in and say you are too far gone. That's because
yeah,
you're never
again,
too far gone to
not
be redeemed.
not to say that they're irredeemable, but to say that, hey, at this moment, I'd be concerned about their salvation.
And especially because we are both pastors and our role is kind of to lead and to shepherd people spiritually. The reality is if none of your life reflects your Christian faith, right? If you're cheating on your wife, if you're stealing from your boss, if you're kicking puppies on street corners, like if you're doing all these bad things, I'm going to have a question. Do you really believe this stuff we're talking about? Because your actions don't reflect that. And an example I've used occasionally in class and sermons and whatever is, put a chair up put a chair in front of you. If I say, I believe that chair can hold me, and someone says, well, you want to sit down on the chair? I say, no, I'm not going to sit down on the chair. Do I really trust that the chair can hold me, or am I just saying that the chair can hold me? And like I said, we cannot tell, right? Ben and I, we do not have some superpower to discern what is in someone's heart. But if 24/7, none of your actions are aligning with the faith that you say you have, I think it's fair to say, well, do you really believe this? Because you're not acting like it's true.
Yeah. I think we could maybe even tiptoe out to the line and say, we can discern the black from the white. We can't discern within the gray. Like, I think there are points in people's lives, and it's certainly not in every circumstance, where like you could say, yeah, this person has crossed the line enough times. I doubt their faith. I don't think it exists.
Well, I would even say, I think that's still in the gray. I think a black situation would be,
Or they
this
just straight
person
up
is
tell you they
worshiping
renounced it.
Satan on the weekends
Yeah.
and deny, and says Jesus was a charlatan. It's like, okay, I'm pretty confident that that person does not have faith hidden away.
Yeah. Or you've called them out on a specific sin. Josh mentioned the cheating on the wife thing. Like, say you've called them out on that. Like, hey, you need to be faithful in your marriage. Confess your sin, receive Christ's forgiveness. They do that, and then like 2 days later, you find out that they're back to cheating on their wife. Like, what do they fear, love, and trust more? Quote our catechism, right?
Well, and you have then you get into the whole question of what is it? What is unrepentance?
Yeah. So like there are a bunch of different rabbit holes that we can track down on this, but like I think it is fair for us to say there is a stick. It's not ours to wield. It's ours to perhaps observe. It's not ours to wield. But like it's there. And Christians should do better.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of the last point before I want to, because we've been talking about avoiding things we shouldn't do. And I would like to transition to maybe, do we pursue things we should do? But one last kind of point here is there's a stick in kind of dealing with ourselves. Because, and take this for example, right? If you have a habit, and like say you really like, you can even call it, you're doing something you shouldn't do, right? And you do it all the time, and you live with someone who every single day, every single time you do that thing you shouldn't do, they remind you about it time and time. They're like, hey, you shouldn't do that. Hey, you shouldn't do that. Right? At some point, you're probably either going to stop the habit, or you're going to remove yourself from dealing with that person. Right? If every time you go out to lunch with a friend, they tell you, oh, you probably shouldn't be ordering fries, they're not very healthy for you. Like, at some point, you're either going to stop ordering fries around the person, or you're going to stop inviting them to lunch. And when we say, well, when we're talking about sin, it's like, at some point, are you going to give up the sin, Or are you going to say, I'm going to leave behind this God who is telling me I should do better? And that's the risk. Because when we leave the faith behind, that's when we, lose our salvation. Because salvation comes from no one else. But there is also an encouragement in Christianity, and Jesus does a lot of this when he's teaching about ethics, to not just avoid doing bad things, but to actually go out and do good things. So Jesus talks about building up not just avoiding harming your neighbor, but actually building them up whenever you can. Jesus talks about not just avoiding lying, but living life so honestly that people trust you at your word. And this is when I think about good works, honestly, and this is more of what I think about, is not just, avoiding bad things is important. But when I think, well, how do we strive to do better? It's how do we take that next step? How do we do more good things? How do we do the good things that we do better? And this is something I love, and maybe more than I should. I love the concept of progressive overload. Okay, and for those of you who don't live in the same worlds that I do, progressive overload is a fitness concept, especially a weightlifting concept, and it is you push yourself as hard as you can, and then the next time you push yourself a little harder. And two examples of this. So for weightlifting, say you have bench press, because people are familiar with the bench press, and you can bench press 225 pounds. You set a goal for yourself. You say, I want to bench press 225 pounds, 3 sets of 15 times. Okay. And then once you hit, you say, oh yes, I hit 225 for 3 sets of 15. And the next time you lift your bench press, you try 235. And it says every time you hit your benchmark, you go a little further. Or an example with running is, I'm going to run 3 miles at a 5 mile an hour pace. And you do that. You say, okay, I'm now going to run 3 miles at a 5.1 mile an hour pace. And it's this idea, you set a benchmark. Once you hit the benchmark, you push a little further. I love this for all, it's probably, it maybe is a little unhealthy how many different parts of my life I apply this idea to. But I think it's really a helpful way to think about good works. It's like, okay, I should be doing this good thing. And once that has become habit for you, you say, okay, what's next? A couple different ways this can apply to the life of a Christian. Your devotion. Are you doing no devotions right now? Okay, your benchmark should be, I'm going to do devotions 5 nights a week. And maybe you pick up a Low Portals and prayer, you get a devotion app on your phone, whatever, and your devotion takes you 3 minutes. And you say, 5 nights a week, I'm going to do this 3-minute devotion. And that becomes a habit. My question for you would be, okay, what's next? And you say, okay, I'm going to start reading 1 chapter of the Bible at night. 6 nights a week. And you do that until that becomes habit. And then what's next? And you keep progressing. Same way with tithing. If you don't give anything to your church, nothing at all, I'm not going to say, well, you should start giving 10% of your income, because that is a huge change. I'm going to say, start giving $20 a week. Right? For a lot of people, $20 a week is not, it's not going to dramatically affect your bottom line, especially out here, right? That's one lunch out here. So, and once that kind of becomes habit, you say, okay, well, what's next? Maybe you go up to $50. Or maybe that's when you start talking about percentages and you say, okay, I'm going to give 1%. And you can apply this to all sorts of things. How often do I serve my wife? How often do I take time to do things for my kids? How often do I go out of my way to do kind things for my neighbor? How often do I serve in my community? Like, all these different things that are good for us to do, just start doing a little better. And when that better becomes habit, you strive for a little more. And that's how I approach the good side of good works. It's like, if you try to go for everything all at once and say, I'm going to, I'm going to go to the soup kitchen 5 hours a week. I'm going to do 3 hours of devotion a night. I'm going to be in prayer every day. It's like, that's going to last for half a week because you're adding too much at once. So I think when we talk about good works, we got to just say, start with a little bit better than you are right now. And then when that becomes comfortable, push a little bit further. Ben's totally tuned out. He was like, oh, Josh is going on a rant about weightlifting. I'm done.
No, I only half tuned out. I will say though, just like how in lifting, it's good to have somebody pushing you to help you get to that overload point, right? Same thing applies when
DJ Khaled. I said DJ Khaled.
Sure.
Another one. Another one.
Same thing applies when you're trying to like incorporate faithful habits into your life. It often requires somebody holding you accountable. Sometimes you need the stick.
I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was training guys at the seminary, I would always tell them to get a gym buddy. And everybody always assumes gym buddy, someone who's going to, encourage me.
Well, yeah, you told me this. You need somebody to crap on you.
Someone who's going to make fun of you relentlessly if you miss.
Yeah.
Because if you skip leg day, someone's going to call you chicken legs for a week. You're not going to skip leg day. Kind of the same thing with like someone who's going to kind of make fun of you a little bit, someone who's going to give you the stick if you're not doing what you should. I think it's good to have that in your life.
Yeah. Somebody who's willing to call you out for the places in which you need growth. And for some people, like getting mocked for skipping leg day works. For some people, like just hearing disapproval from somebody they respect can be plenty.
Yeah.
So find somebody that communicates well with you and that can hold you accountable and will hold you accountable for the ways in which you seek to grow. And like, again, circling back to the conversation we started all of this with, we're encouraging you to do this not because we want to be prudes, but because this is the way we were designed to function, was in God's good design for his people. And that's ultimately what good works are. It's us living in the design. And there's an incredible beauty to that.
And Ben and I both genuinely believe that the most loving thing we can do for you is to encourage you to live according to that design. Right? If I call you out on your sin or if I'm pushing you to be better, it's not because I hate you. It's not because I'm trying to catch you in something. It's because I genuinely believe that's going to be better for you.
Yeah.
And it might not feel like it, but that's where we're coming from.
I can't speak for Josh because sometimes he comes across as a soulless monster. But, like, for me, as your pastor, to those of you who are listening from Good Shepherd, like, there are deep bonds formed between pastors and their members, those that they are shepherding. And to see you hurting, either literally, like you are going through something in health, in life, in whatever, or just see you missing something. You don't even know that you're hurting, but you are. It's painful. And it impacts me. It impacts Josh, I'm assuming. Because we love you guys. And we want you to know the love of Christ. And what better way to do that than living the design that he's given us so that we can show that love to one another. So there's my final pitch. Josh?
You know what? You called me a soulless monster, and I recently had a text conversation where someone like complimented me. And if you don't know, I'm really bad at taking compliments. So my reaction was to send the clip of Captain Barbosa from one of the Pirates of the Caribbean, where he says, "You're off the edge of the map here. Here there be monsters," because I identify with that sometimes. I think this is a good place to close. In that and I'm gonna just jump into my takeaway.
Go
Your
for
good
it.
works don't earn your salvation, but they are good for you. And especially when it's hard to do good works, it's good to do hard things. So you're saved. Go act like it.
There's the great Luther quote, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. Again, just leaning into this idea of God's design for his creation was that we do these things and that we do them well. And when we do them well, it benefits us, it benefits our neighbor, and it shows our love for God. So do them. Do them without fear, do them without hesitation, and know that it is holy and pleasing in the sight of our God.
So thank you for joining us for this hour of Man Buns and Jesus. We hope it was enlightening. We hope that you're
Edifying.
we hope that you feel your understanding of this faith that we share is a little bit deeper than it was when you started listening to this episode. That is kind of our goal here. Like and subscribe to the podcast if you appreciate that, if you want to get notifications about the show, if you want to boost our egos a little bit. We like all these things. Give the podcast a rating, I guess, and share with your friends. If you find it helpful, you probably have friends who would also find it helpful. So go ahead and send them a link and say, hey, I kind of like these idiots on this show. You should give them a listen and see what it's all about. And if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, whatever, go ahead and reach out to us. If you know us personally, just shoot us a text. If you don't, the show has a Facebook page. You can put a message on there, and we'll check it out at some point. And this has been an episode of Man Buns and Jesus, sponsored by no one. Boom, because we don't do ads or shameless plugs. We do shameless plugs. With that, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.